Today we're diving into a really powerful collection of declassified Soviet intelligence documents. Now these aren't just historical summaries or someone's interpretation of events, this is the raw evidence of the war on the Eastern Front. And what's so chilling is that much of it comes from the perpetrators themselves. It's all preserved under a very fitting title, without a statute of limitations.
Just to show you what we're dealing with, let's start here. This one document really gets to the heart of it all. It's a top-secret Soviet intelligence report from 1943, and it says the German forces brought 3 train cars full of children under 12 to a station in Lithuania and just started selling them for 3 marks each. This isn't an allegation, you see. It's an official dispatch reporting on a completely open sale. This single page shows you that the absolute dehumanization that happened wasn't some accident of war. It was a central feature.
So, you have to ask, how could something like that even happen? To understand it, we have to realize that the war in the East was never meant to be a normal military conflict. In the Nazis' own words, it was a Vernichtungskrieg, a war of annihilation.
Yeah, the main goal wasn't just to defeat an army or capture a city like in other wars. It was, as the planners themselves stated, to secure Lebensraum, or living space. And that meant clearing the land of its native population, literally through extermination and deportation, all to make way for German settlement. The people who already lived there, they were seen as nothing more than a biological obstacle that had to be removed.
Now, a goal that extreme needs a really powerful ideology to back it up. These weren't just random acts of cruelty. They were the logical endpoint of a very specific and well-documented worldview.
So this ideology basically stood on 3 main pillars. First, as we just talked about, was Lebensraum, the need for land. Second was a really radical anti-Semitism, which saw Jewish people as the biological root of the entire Soviet system. So in their minds, to destroy the Soviet Union, you had to completely eradicate the Jewish people. And third was anti-Slavism, which classified Slavic peoples, Russians, Poles, Ukrainians, as Untermenschen, or subhumans, who had no right to their land or even to their own lives.
And listen, this wasn't some hidden subtext. It was stated policy, right from the top. As Hitler himself put it, this wasn't a war between nations playing by any rules. It was a racial war. And its explicit goal was to exterminate entire groups of people who were seen as the enemy's intellectual and biological core.
Okay, so this next part is where it gets really crucial. We're going to look at how this abstract ideology of hatred was systematically translated into concrete, official military orders. This is where the theory becomes practice. And this is where you can see just how different this war was intended to be. On one side, you have the basic rules of war that most armies at least pretend to follow, and on the other, you have the actual directives for the Eastern Front. Orders like the infamous Commissar Order basically just suspended the law. They told soldiers to be the bearers of a merciless racial idea, they gave officers the right to kill civilians whenever they wanted, and they ordered the immediate execution of all captured political commissars and Jews. And this wasn't just some vague memo from the very top either. It was pushed all the way down the chain of command. I mean, here we have an order from a field marshal, von Reichenau, a very senior commander. He's reinforcing the mission, telling every soldier that they have to understand the necessity for the harsh but just retribution against the Jewish subrace. The call for genocide couldn't be more explicit.
Okay, so with those orders in place, we now turn to the declassified testimonies from the very soldiers and officers who carried them out. This is the reality of that war of annihilation on the ground, and it's in their own words.
Here's a German soldier, in his official interrogation, describing what they called an anti-partisan operation. But it wasn't a battle. It was just the total destruction of a village. And what's so chilling is the language he uses. It's so detached, almost procedural. I personally burned 9 houses. It doesn't sound like a crime of passion. It sounds like a task being checked off a list.
The scale of this is it's staggering. One soldier testified that in a single operation, they executed 500 people. He said that he personally, with a machine gun, killed around 200 of them, and that included dozens of women. I mean, that one testimony alone accounts for wiping out the population of an entire area.
And the killing itself was incredibly systematic. The testimony of an SS Obergruppenführer named Friedrich Jeckeln, who was in charge of liquidating the Riga ghetto, lays out this cold industrial process. It wasn't chaos, it was a checklist. Marching victims to pits, forcing them to undress so their clothes could be sorted and shipped to Germany, shooting them in groups, and then later, even using other prisoners to dig up and burn the bodies to hide the evidence. Every single step was planned.
The cruelty also took so many other forms. This testimony details what happened at a children's home. Children were basically used as living blood banks for wounded German soldiers. They were repeatedly drained of their blood, and one doctor actually testified that, quote, "The death of Russian children saved the life of Germans. No extra food, no special care, they were just used until they died."
So you hear these individual stories, and it's absolutely horrifying. But it's so important to understand that they all fit into a larger organized system. This wasn't just about soldiers running wild, it was about an entire machinery of genocide that was deliberately set in motion.
One of the tools in this system was the gas fan. In Russian, they were called dushegubka, which translates to soul destroyer. A captured German official described exactly how it worked. It looked like a normal bus, but the back was hermetically sealed. The engine exhaust was piped into that rear compartment, quietly killing dozens of people inside while it was being driven to a mass grave that had already been dug. It was murder, made mobile and efficient.
So you had this whole toolbox of extermination methods. Mass shootings were the most common for sure. Gas fans offered a different kind of mobile efficiency. Extermination camps like Auschwitz, which are also detailed in these documents, took murder and industrialized it on a scale nobody had ever seen. And then you had the quieter, but just as deliberate methods, planned starvation and those horrific medical experiments we just talked about. This system also created what they call dead zones. The testimony of one German commander describes an order to clear the entire male population from the huge area between the Donetsk and Dnieper rivers. These men weren't all killed on the spot. They were deported to Germany to be used as slave labor. This had a dual purpose. It erased the demographic future of the region, and it left the land empty for colonization.
So the big question is, how do we know all of this in such excruciating detail? Well, this last part focuses on the documents themselves, how this evidence was collected and why it's so powerful today.
You see, this evidence was gathered incredibly meticulously by Soviet counterintelligence units like SMARSH. As they liberated territory, they immediately grabbed all the German military and administrative documents they could find. They conducted exhaustive interrogations of captured officers and soldiers, creating these detailed protocols that we're drawing from. And they did forensic work at the mass graves, which backed up the testimonies with hard physical proof.
Which brings us right back to the title of this collection, Bez sroka davnosti. It means without a statute of limitations. The name itself is a statement. It's a declaration that these are crimes against humanity, and they can never, ever expire from our legal or historical memory. They are always subject to judgment.
And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing to take away from this. This collection isn't a history book filtered through a narrator. It's the primary source material. It's raw, undeniable proof of a planned genocide, told not by the victims, but by the planners, the commanders, and the actual triggermen. This is their own account of what they did. And that leaves us with a pretty profound question. This material isn't meant to provoke hatred, but to force us to understand. When we are faced with such direct, unvarnished evidence from the perpetrators themselves, what is our responsibility to that truth? What is our duty to remember and to make sure it's never, ever forgotten?